So I've been working on a 97 TJ. And the problem is that it would crank, but not get any fuel pressure at all. So of course you got to check and make sure these relays in here are good. It's the fuel pump relay, automatic shutdown relay, I believe. Make sure all these fuses are good. Go underneath the dash right here, and there's fuses back in there behind the dash. You just pull this little strap here, this comes off, and then it flips back. Check and make sure that's okay. You'll find some of the gauges aren't working, and sometimes that's associated with, let me walk around the corner here. Sometimes that is associated with this switch right here that's underneath the steering column. This truck originally had an alarm system on it, so I pulled a lot of that out. But ultimately, it came down to this problem right here. Right there. There is a gray plug that's here. I would get power to the top side of the plug, but no power to the bottom side of the plug. This plug over here, don't mess with it. It's the same type of plug. It was gray. The one over here was gray, but it looked just like this. So what I did was, hell, I've even gone to the point of changing the computer and that didn't fix it. What I did was I cut it out and I soldered and rewired it all back in. This plug runs the VSS, it runs your backup lights, and it runs your fuel pump, and it's the ground for fuel system. Also make sure that you test out your crank positioning sensor, or excuse me, your cam positioning sensor here and your crank positioning sensor over here. The crank positioning sensor will allow the system to know when it's time to spark and time the fuel pump to the engine. But I went through the whole wiring system, checked the grounds. This is a ground back here that you need to check. This on the side of the block right there. Check that, check your grounds up here, check your grounds here. Go through and check all your grounds. You can ultimately jumper this here. There's an article on Jeep forum that tells you how to jumper it, but I'd recommend not jumpering it. Also, they say check underneath this fuse box to see if there's any corrosion up underneath here, which I didn't have any underneath here. Ultimately, it was this plug here. When I cut the plug out and splice it back in, I've got full power to the back of the Jeep for the fuel pump, the backup lights, and everything else. Also make sure you got a hot battery as well. So that's it. That's what got this thing running. I'll crank it up for you real quick. Oh, and you can crank this thing. You notice the fuel spouts right there. Low on fuel in the tank. I've got very little in the tank. All my gauges are working. I've got check engine light. That's fine. I'll see what that code is. But you can crank it without that on there. And you can see I've got nothing hooked up here. I actually had the tank sitting on the ground while I was testing it through this whole setup.